Good morning and welcome, everybody. I'm Interim City Manager Chris Lohr, and we're hosting this virtual community meeting today to talk about the proposed income tax changes on the November ballot, and also provide an opportunity for residents to ask us questions about that. First, I'd like to ask the chiefs and the finance director to introduce themselves.
Good morning. My name is Dan Stutzel, and I'm the fire chief here in Riverside.
Good morning. I'm Frank Robinson, and I'm the police chief.
Hello, I'm Tom Garrett, Finance Director.
Thank you. So for most of us, the income tax and income tax credit reductions can be a little complicated. So what I'm going to do today is walk us through where we are with our current income tax structure, what is proposed on the ballot in November, and then what those changes would mean both to residents and to the police and fire departments. And then at the end, we'll open it up for questions, and we'll do our best to answer anything you want to ask about the proposed ballot measure. I'm going to go ahead and start the presentation here. Okay. So to start us off, so we understand where we are today. So right now, for Riverside residents, we have a 1.5% income tax. And with that, the city gives a half credit or 50% on taxes that you pay where you work in another community, if you work outside Riverside. And that's up to 0.75%. So, and 1% of that income tax goes directly to the general fund. And that can be used for all sorts of city operations, including police and fire, streets, parks, and the other staff to run operations, finance, and human resources, IT. The other 0.5% goes directly to police and fire. And I want to point out that our income tax does not include any pensions or Social Security income that you might have. So that's where we are today. I have a graph here I want to show you. So what that means for Riverside residents. So because everybody pays 1.5%, regardless where they work, but they only get a half credit for what you pay if you work somewhere else. That means that residents end up paying different rates in reality. So if you look at this graph here, I've got the cities of where residents work and what rates they pay. So for example, if you work in the city of Dayton, they have a 2.5% income tax there. So you're required to pay that 2.5% there to Dayton. And then you come back here to Riverside where you live. And because you only get half credit up to 0.75%, you have to pay an additional 0.75% to Riverside. Similar with Huber Heights and Fairborn, they have different rates. But if you live in Riverside and you work in Huber Heights, you pay their 2.25%, and then you come back to Riverside and you pay an additional 0.75% for a total of 3%. In Fairborn, you're paying a total of 2.75%. Now, if you live in Riverside and you happen to work somewhere where there's no income tax, like Beaver Creek Township, you come back and you pay your 1.5%. In Riverside, if you live in Riverside and work in Riverside, you pay 1.5%. And this is important to talk about non-residents, people who live outside of.
To put a gas station there, it is market.
Well, he's representing his client.
Excuse me for just a minute. I need to. Okay, back to it. The point I was getting ready to make is non-residents who work in Riverside, they come to Riverside, they pay our 1.5% income tax. And they may go back to the place where they live like say they live in Huber Heights and work in Riverside, well, they'll pay 1.5% to Riverside in income tax, and then they go back to Huber Heights. And they pay the remainder of what Huber Heights charges for income tax there because they're a Huber resident. So they'll pay an additional 0.75%. So they're paying income tax, but it doesn't benefit the city of Riverside here, even though they're working in Riverside. The benefit is only that 1.5%. And Huber Heights also receives a benefit there.
And just to emphasize, the blue bars is the portion of the tax that's received by
That's correct.
Riverside. The
Yes,
yellow would go to the other city.
exactly. That's correct. Thank you, Tom. So what the proposed income tax looks like is the base rate would go up to 2.5%, but your full 100% income tax credit would be restored. So with if the ballot measure passes in November, if you work in another community and you pay income tax there, the city of Riverside would give you full credit for what you pay in that other community. So the 1% tax continues to go, 1% of the 2.5 continues to go to the general fund. And what goes to police and fire is 1.5%. So where it was a 0.5% dedicated exclusively to police and fire, we're going to increase that to 1.5% of the income tax that you pay. And that the additional revenue would go exclusively to the police and fire department for operations. Because of the changes in the way that the taxing works and the credit for income tax paid outside of Riverside, the way it works out is about 45% of residents will end up paying the same or less based on the 2019 numbers. And I have a graph to show you on that a little bit later that explains that. Something else that's important to realize is that the pension income and Social Security are not taxed. So if you're on retirement, regardless of what the rate is, whether it's increased, you won't be paying income tax on that retirement income. Okay, so here's what it looks like for Riverside residents if the 2.5% with 2.5% tax rate with the 100% credit passes in November. So if you work in the city of Dayton, live in Riverside here, and once again, as Tom mentioned, the outside community is the yellow color here, and Riverside portion of tax is blue. So if you work in the city of Dayton and you live in Riverside, you're going to pay that 2.5% to the city of Dayton. When you come back to Riverside, you get full credit for what you paid. So you won't pay any additional income tax. If you work in Huber Heights, live in Riverside, you pay your 2.25% to the city of Huber Heights where you work, and then you come back and you're just going to pay an additional 0.25% to the city of Riverside.
Which is the difference up to the Riverside 2.5%.
That's correct. That's the difference to the actual Riverside 2.5% income tax rate. If you happen to work in Fairborn, you would pay their 2% income tax and come back and pay the remainder of what the Riverside income tax is, and that's a 0.5%. So it changes here for if somebody lives in Riverside and works in Beaver Creek Township, you would then pay 2.5% to the city of Riverside. If you live in Riverside and work in Riverside, you pay the 2.5%. And here's something that's important. Non-residents would pay 2.5% to the city of Riverside, so that we would be capturing more of that income tax revenue. Whereas with the 1.5%, with the half credit, non-residents only pay 1.5% and go back to where they live and pay the remainder. Now all that income tax, that revenue would be captured for non-residents who work in the city. I think that's important. Sorry, I got there. Now we're back on track. So the final impact on Riverside residents, if the ballot measure passes in November. So whereas now a Riverside resident who works in the city of Dayton actually pays a total of 3.25%. If the measure passed in November, because of the restoration of your 100% tax credit, they would only pay 2.5% total income tax rate. Huber Heights, Riverside residents that now work in Huber Heights are paying a total of 3%. If it passed in November, then that resident would only pay 2.5% because of the restoration of the tax credit there. Fairborn likewise would be less. And what the change in the tax structure does, and it makes it even and equitable across the board. So everyone ends up paying the same tax rate. A Riverside resident who works in Riverside pays 2.5%, and a Riverside resident who works in Beaver Creek Township pays 2.5% to Riverside. And here the non-residents who work in Riverside, their 1.5% rate goes up to 2.5%. And so we capture more of that income tax revenue. So some of the results of this, so what this change does is it generates an additional $3 million in revenue for police and fire services. And so it's going to allow us to add some additional firefighters that are very, that are sorely needed. I'm going to ask Chief Stitzel to give some information about what that would mean if the income tax ballot measure passes in November.
Certainly. Over the past several years, and they're not just the region, but really nationwide, there's been a shortage of part-time firefighters. And we currently operate on a combination department where we have 19 full-time and approximately 23 part-time firefighters. And it's been a challenge to keep a number of part-time firefighters here. And one, there's just not a lot of them out there anymore because of the shortage, but also they're looking to get full-time jobs elsewhere, or wherever they can get a full-time job, they're wanting to go. And so our part-time program is truly a revolving door of young people that are looking to get into this as a full-time career. They get their basic and their minimum certifications as an EMT and a firefighter, and they can work part-time with those. But once they get their paramedic certification and their level 2 firefighter, they're out looking for full-time jobs to go elsewhere. So we spend a lot of time equipping and training and getting these young part-timers up to speed to where we can actually utilize them. And about that time that we get to that point, they leave to go to other jobs. So we're looking for some sustainability in our workforce by providing mostly full-time. Again, this measure will not be able to get us 100% full-time, but we would be relying on part-time very minimally. It would be something that's a lot more manageable. Hopefully in the future, we would be able to make that complete transition over. And that's really what we need in our city here. We're on track right now to do over 5,100 calls this year for EMS and fire services. And that's more than a 60% increase since 2006. In 2006, the city council approved us to staff at 9 firefighters a day with a combination of full-time, part-time. Well, right now, because of the shortage, I can't get us above 8 a day. So we're actually seeing a decrease in our staffing with a 60% increase in our call volume. So the crews, the apparatus, everything is just being ran continuously, and it's a larger workload on a smaller pool of people. So by getting these additional firefighters, we're able to staff additional apparatus where we can spread that workload out. We can rely on mutual aid a lot less because we're calling mutual aid every single day. And it's because 30% of our calls are overlapping. When calls overlap, then I don't have enough crews on duty to respond to those. So we have to rely on our neighbors to come in and help us out. part of that problem is there are going to be a longer response time to your emergency. If you call 911 and you're expecting an ambulance come from Valley and Harshman and Route 4's fire station there, if they're already out on a call, then it may be coming all the way from Huber Heights or Fairborn or Beaver Creek. Just depends on, the situation and what we have available. Also right now, and a majority of the time, every time an ambulance leaves the fire station, we do not have enough people left back to staff the fire engine. So the fire engine will be out of service, even though it's sitting there. There's just nobody there to run it until the ambulance gets back from the hospital. Same goes if it leaves on a fire call, there's nobody there to run the ambulance. So we have that situation that happens the majority of the time. We have 2 fire stations and we are probably around 50% efficiency because we don't have enough staff to run the apparatus that we need to run. By passing this tax, getting these full-time people in, we're going to be able to staff 2 fire engines and 2 ambulances around the clock, 7 days a week. And that's what we really need for our call volume, for what we feel this city deserves as a emergency service. And that's what we're kind of working to achieve with that. In that, we're going to be able to meet the national standards of what a fire department should be able to perform, and as far as response time, service delivery, and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of benefits that's going to go to this. And back to what the city manager was saying, the approximately 45% that's going to pay the same or less income tax. And then the retired people are on a pension and military that do not pay the income tax at all anyway, they're going to get all this benefit with paying the same or less tax. And the people that are going to have to pay more tax, they're going to see a benefit that's really tenfold for the dollar that they're going to spend in income tax, because just their money alone wouldn't be enough to do this. So by being able to filter this money back to the city, instead of where the people work, and also on the non-residents. And I, for one, am a non-resident. My income tax that I pay to the city will go up 1%. And I certainly support that. It's what this city truly needs. And we need this tax to pass, so your fire department can continue to serve you and improve that service to where it really should be. And we're to the point now to where this is we're in a crisis situation almost on a daily basis with our staffing. It'll certainly alleviate all the overtime. We're spending overtime, probably more than 50% of the month we're spending on overtime just to get our staffing up to a minimum level. And it's really not enough. That minimum level was in place 20 years ago, and we have not been able to increase that minimum level because we just don't have the funds to do that. So that's why we're here today, and that's why we have this measure on the ballot, to really improve that fire department and the EMS service delivery from us. And we'll pass it over to Chief Robinson with the police department. He can tell you about what this tax means to the police department.
Thank you, Chief Justice Stitzel. Well, I just want to go ahead and say right off the bat that it's a huge shot in the arm to be able to get 3 police officers added to our staffing. Currently, we have 4 shifts. 2 of those have 5 officers on them. 2 of them have 6. So obviously there, by adding the 3, you're going to be able to put 2 on other shifts, so make all the shifts equal at 6 on each shift, which hopefully will, and this year we have done this. We've used a lot of our overtime this year. We have done it in the past, but we've had a lot of issues and with staffing levels, but adding on would make it better. So hopefully that's going to cut down our overtime a bunch. Also, it's going to allow us to have what we really need is an SRO and a community service officer. I mean, that officer is obviously going to have other duties as well, just not just those, but it will give us a better look into the school system and as far as being able to be out in the community more, making more efforts more than we already do. And we think that's a great thing. Also, we currently have 3 detectives. And what happens when you only have 3 detectives is you run into, with our city, we're pretty busy. I know that you all have seen us you see us in the paper, on the news all the time. We're very busy. And so sometimes property crimes go to the wayside. I don't say they don't get lost in the shuffle, but they kind of get pushed down the ladder. So with a Fort Detective, it allows you to be able to actually work more property crimes, and that's a big section of detective that needs a little bit of attention, and that would allow us to do that by having a Fort Detective in there. We had one before, but then we had some openings and so forth, so we had to take them out of there. So that we can see the difference between the time they were in there and currently. So it would be a big shot in the arm for the detective section as well. One of the things that we have issue with all the time, and that is equipment. Hoping that these monies will allow us to replace and maintain some very important equipment that we use every day. There was a time for a couple of years I didn't buy any cruisers. It's very difficult to do that because then you're working with some equipment that's getting older and worn out, and it costs more to repair. So it's better to be on top of that. We unfortunately have fallen behind a little bit on being able to purchase cruisers. Now we bought it, I think one the last 2 years in a row. So that was, at least we did that, but we're still down, and we're using cars that are getting older, and we need to be able to change that. Also, it's very important for us to be very transparent. And one of the things that we have, one of the things we were like maybe second, and even in the county, I think to start, was the body camera program that we have in Riverside. And it costs money to replace those cameras. It costs money to keep everything going like that. So for us to be as transparent as we want to be, and as much as you want us to be, we need to be able to maintain that equipment. Computers in the cars. One of the most important things that we have in a car is the computer, and they become obsolete after 5 years, and we're pushing that at 5 and 6 and 7 years of this equipment, and we're falling behind every time we don't replace those things. And this will actually help us to get back up to where we should be as far as our equipment. And obviously with the personnel, obviously we'll make like I said, a big shot in the arm for the department. Our main goal here is to be more efficient and obviously more effective for the citizens of Riverside. And I think with your help, we can actually achieve that. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to both your chiefs. So I have one more point I'll make on the impact on city operations. So the dedication of the additional funds to the police fire department is going to make those two departments much less reliant on the general fund. And because of the way we're distributing the funds, it's going to bring the two departments closer to equal, to parity on the number of police officers, firefighters that we do have. One last thing I do want to talk about here. After City Council passed the legislation to put this income tax measure on the ballot in November, there were some concerns. As I mentioned, the income tax increase is connected and tied to the restoration of the income tax credit back to 100%. So the question was raised, well, if that change was made, couldn't City Council just come back and reduce that income tax credit again next year? So in response to that, City Council saw the need to take some action, and they passed a resolution to put a moratorium on decreasing that income tax credit. So this was passed earlier in the month. And what it says, if the ballot measure is passed in November, there will be a 10-year moratorium, and that means that it won't be able to be done for 10 years. So there'll be a 10-year moratorium on reducing the income tax credit that residents pay. So City Council has passed that legislation to say that there's a commitment to keeping the tax rate at 2.5% with the full credit. And that commitment is made for the next 10 years if the ballot measure passes in November. So that is all I have for a presentation. I want to say thank you for everybody who took the time to watch this video or be a part of the virtual meeting. I want to encourage everybody before we open it up to questions, encourage everybody to get out there and vote, whether you're a yes or a no for this issue. But I also want to say that the amount of funding that the city receives does impact the level of services that we can provide to the community. So we want to provide stellar service to the residents and to the community. And the additional revenue would help us do that for the police and the fire departments. So thank you again for coming. With that, I will see if we have anybody in the attending the virtual meeting who would like to ask a question. I'm going to go ahead and ask them to unmute and go ahead and ask us a question if you'd like.
Pass the good word to your neighbors.
Yes. Last call for questions. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here today.
Thank you.